on overall health. I'm so excited to dive into this discussion today that will be moderated by Dr. Emily Kraus, one of PCA's very own National Leadership Council members. Before I turn it over to Emily, just a few things to note. We are recording this webinar, and we will send it out with other links in the coming days following the webinar. And I also wanted to note that attendees can submit their questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Dr. Emily Kraus to introduce the rest of the panel.
All right, successfully got my camera on. That's a good start. And now let's see if I can successfully share my screen without showing you all the tabs that I have open right now. All right. Can I get a thumbs up from the crowd or from somebody to just make sure that you can see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, great. So we have an hour, less than an hour, to cover a very broad topic. And my hope is that this will generate a lot of discussion and ideas and new topics that we can then expand upon in future talks. So as much as I would like to accomplish everything and cover all of the topics, because I feel like they're all really important, I have a feeling we'll want to be inspired to have some additional conversations about this. So I wanted to start by introducing we'll first talk about our outline today and breakdown. So we're going to cover two health topics, puberty, the menstrual cycle, as well as relative energy deficiency in sport. So really three topics. And just I'll get an understanding and help. Usually, I really want to allow this to generate some of the conversation to dive into the coaching topic, which we'll cover cultivating a positive foundation for athletes, and then get into the discussion. So I'm very excited to not be the only person up here on this panel, but moderating a panel of really incredible thought leaders, coaches, clinicians. And so I wanted to introduce the rest of the team. So I'll start with Dr. Julie McCleery. Julie and I have worked together for a couple of years now on a couple of different topics. Actually, one of my first virtual panels was led by Dr. Julie McCleery for the Female Athlete Conference 2 years ago. The next one is next week. You can still register. That's in Boston. Julie works at the University of Washington Center for Leadership and Athletics. She is at the intersection of research and practice. I like to call Julie the coach of coaches. She serves as a PI, or principal investigator, for two of the center's main projects, Ambitious Coaching and State of Play Seattle-King County, both of which have translated into community-based efforts to ensure equitable access to high-quality sports experiences. Julie is going to initiate or lead that discussion on coaching principles and that foundation. Next, Dr. Bianca Edison is another fellow sports medicine attending physician at the Jackie and Jean Autry Orthopedic Center at Children's Hospital LA, and is an assistant professor of orthopedics at the Keck School of Medicine of the University of Southern California. Dr. Edison, her areas of expertise include dance injuries, sports-related concussion, injury prevention, and overuse injuries, as well as biomechanical analysis. Bianca and I, or Dr. Edison and I, began working together at the Pediatric Research and Sports Medicine Research Interest Group covering the female athlete. So she has a lot of insight and has a lot of experience, the clinician and a researcher. I'm going to skip myself. I'm going to introduce myself last. Coach Gavin Tucker has been a track and field and cross country coach for 24 years, currently coaching at Seattle Academy, where he has been coaching since 2006. He has coached 2 Washington State track and field state championship teams, boys team in 2005 and girls team in 2016. And lastly, my name is Dr. Emily Kraus. I'm a clinical assistant professor at Stanford Children's Orthopedics and Sports Medicine Center. I like that I was reading my own bio. I also direct a female athlete research program called FASTER, which stands for Female Athlete Science and Translational Research. This is funded and supported by the WUSI Human Performance Alliance. My passions and interests are in the female athlete, in bone health, menstrual cycle, and just encouraging athletes to stay in the long game for long-term sports and healthy sports participation. So let's dive in. I wanted to give a couple of case presentations, not to dive deep into the medical aspects of this, but actually just to share some different scenarios. And these are scenarios that Dr. Edison and I probably see on an almost daily basis, maybe weekly basis. So a 16-year-old runner presents to the clinic with hip pain. She reports that she made the varsity team, and because of that, she's been really increasing her mileage over the summer. And they train really early in the morning, so she's always skipping breakfast. She admits that she's afraid of carbs. Just a lot of the social media out there has been giving carbs a bad rap, so she's been following suit with that. And also admits to eating less red meat because a lot of her teammates are vegetarian or vegan, and so she's been considering practicing that as well. Of note, she lost her period over the summer around the same time that she made these dietary and training changes. And recently, she's shared with her teammates that her coach has praised her on how fit she looks. Now, typically when I'm in more of a clinical scenario, I'll get into a lot more details about the physical exam. But when I think about this and think about hip pain, and I'm sure Dr. Edison as well, we get concerned that there might be something else underlying that could be more concerning, more bony. And so we're going to do that workup, which could potentially lead to a change in that particular athlete's season and maybe end that season early. Another case presentation, a 16-year-old basketball player presents to the clinic with her third ankle sprain. She's playing both on the school and club team. See that a lot when they're actually playing almost simultaneously on both teams. Because of that, she trains about 7 days a week, doesn't take a day off. She's been applauded for being one of the top players on the team. And despite having her third ankle sprain and not even really being able to fully bear weight, she reports that she cannot miss a practice or a game, and she'll lose her position on the team. And she's really needed, and she feels this pressure to continue to play despite feeling this ankle pain. Lastly, a 13-year-old gymnast presents to the clinic with wrist pain. She's a level 8 gymnast, trains about 20 to 30 hours per week, probably 6 to 7 days per week. She doesn't ever bring snacks to practice because it's viewed as being weak, and they don't have time, they don't allow for time for snacks. She is often recalls comparing her body to her teammate's body, and she doesn't want to get her period because of how it may actually change her body and may change how she performs. So she thinks that losing her period is almost like a rite of passage. So questions that some of this athlete might have are, why did this injury happen in the first place? What happens if I keep training and train through the pain? What do I communicate with my coaches? And how can I prevent this from happening again? As clinicians, we're wondering, also, why did this injury happen? What were some of the risk factors that led to this? Should this athlete rest completely? Should she modify her activity? Is that safe to modify, or do we need to shut her down completely? And how do we communicate with the coach? Is there an athletic trainer? Are there other communication systems already set up? And really, what research has been done on injury risk overall for this particular injury? And how can we educate the athlete and the coach for future to reduce future injury? And then for the coach, also, why did this injury happen? What's my role in this dynamic? How do I respond if this athlete wants to keep training? Do I let her keep training? Do I have sign off? Do we need a note? What information would be helpful for that coach to know in the future? And then as far as communications, and then how can that coach maybe prevent this type of injury from happening again? So there are a lot of different areas to focus on. And of course, we're not going to be able to cover them all, but I think starting with just getting a basic understanding of some of this information can be really helpful. So I want to start with this, and I always give these quotes, but I wanted to share with everyone the state of the female athlete research right now. So based on the review of the literature and looking at some of the top sports exercise and sports medicine, sports science journals, female participation rates range from 39 to 42% in these sports medicine research studies. And of those, 4 to 13% of those studies are only studying women. So the rest were mixed studies studying men and women. And 3% of exercise physiology study participants are women. So there's a huge gap in the female athlete research space. And we're trying to close that gap with FASTER and some of the work and getting a better understanding of where those gaps and what those needs are from those athletes. So I think it's important to talk about the transition of puberty and being patient during this process. And Bianca, Dr. Edison, please feel free to chime in too, as far as some of your perspectives. But I think that understanding that puberty is unique for everyone, and that that embracing that uniqueness is really important within that process. And that hormones are complex and beautiful, and we should really respect those transitions. And Dr. Edison, I wanted to just pull you in for this, because I think this is a hard conversation for some athletes to have, especially ones that may emphasize leanness. I think dance and dance medicine has been a big challenge with just what are those standards and the body comparison that takes place. So if you have anything to add on that, please feel free to chime in.
Oh yeah. Kind of athletes that are at risk for this to occur can include in sports that emphasize leanness or are based on aesthetics. So diving, gymnastics, ice skating, dance, and then also those sports that participate in weight class type sports. So wrestling, rowing, even because you want to maintain that buoyancy on the water, boxing, and then the gravitational sports. If athletes or coaches are really thinking about the efficiency of movement, so running, ski jumping, pole vaulting, cycling, and so it's really important to understand that those are sports in which the risks can be higher, but it can occur in any sport. And the other thing that can happen is that it might not happen intentionally, and that some athletes might just not be aware of all that they need to help support themselves, to help their bodies continue to grow and develop, particularly when they're going through these times of really fast growth and when their hormones change. And they might think that what they were in the past still will continue to maintain themselves, without realizing that actually with their rapid growth, with their changes, they actually need more to take in to help support themselves and stay strong. And if they don't, then it definitely affects their hormones. The other thing that I think it's important to note is sometimes these conversations, for some reason, in regards to how they've been socialized, can be a little taboo or can feel a little uncomfortable. And it's mostly because those open conversations aren't happening on a regular basis, and kids might be going through these times when they're changing so much. Their bodies are changing. They're not understanding, or things feel weird, and they're not realizing that there are a lot of other people that are going through the same thing, just because those conversations are happening in an open setting.
Yeah, Dr. Edison, I think it's so important for us to start to normalize these conversations and talk about them, and I think that's one of the steps in order to make some progress in this. And I think that the menstrual cycle in general can be very complicated. I actually put this figure up for the purposes of just understanding that women go through a lot of different phases of 1 month that men don't, especially during those early puberty phases. And I don't have time to cover the ins and outs of the menstrual cycle, nor do I think it's completely that helpful. But I think understanding that the period is just one part of the menstrual cycle, and it's where the menstrual cycle usually starts. But there are multiple other phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And within those phases, you can see these fluctuations in these hormones. And so with that comes times when an athlete may feel better or stronger or have different physical symptoms. And then other times where they may feel more fatigued, more just in general, they may be having other premenstrual symptoms, and those are usually happening in that kind of before the bleed phase, or the period in the mid to late luteal phase. And having athletes feel comfortable and understanding and empowered by their menstrual cycle, as opposed to having this be something that's stigmatized or a bad thing or a negative thing, or maybe a performance, they may have a negative impact on their performance. Having them feel like that they don't feel almost debilitated from the menstrual cycle or any phases, I think is really important. And also feeling comfortable talking about some of these symptoms, I think is also really important. So I'm going to leave it at that. But if the group has more questions about specifically the phases of the menstrual cycle, I'm happy to, we're happy to chat more. But I think for the sake of just being able to cover some of the other areas of what happens with a lack of a menstrual cycle, I'll keep it at that. Yeah, there we go. So I do think for menstrual cycle irregularities, I think it's nice to know what's normal, what's abnormal, and when we need to be maybe a little bit more concerned and bring that athlete or recommend that athlete come into the doctor's office to have some more conversations. So typically we see the first period starting before the age of 15. And menstrual cycles can have a lot of variability lasting from 21 to 45 days. And I think that's important, that it's not just this typical 30-day or 28-day cycle. And bleeding can last between 2 to 7 days. And there can be levels of irregularity during those first couple of years after menarche, which is defined as the first period. That being said, sometimes I'll have athletes who do have menstrual irregularities for other reasons, and then they try and attribute it just to, or say that it's just because it's been, they just got their period within the last couple of years. But sometimes I do think that there's probably some other contributor. When we start to think about abnormal periods, it's when there isn't a first period by the age of 15. And I think we do see these in athletes, and sometimes it gets normalized within their group that it's okay to have a missed period. So I think making sure that that's knowledge that they know. No breast development by age 13, menstrual cycles of less than 21 or more than 45 days, shorter or longer bleeds than 2 to 7 days, or very heavy or painful periods. And then I think that it's normal to feel like, as far as kind of periods in sports and performance, I want to normalize this variation of how an athlete feels throughout their performance, throughout their phase. I think it's important for an athlete also to document and use some type of menstrual cycle tracking so they can know what's going on with their body. I think the N of one of an athlete can be really valuable, and they can learn a lot from their own experiences from month to month, and understand maybe what works better. That late night during that exam week probably is going to affect them a little bit more differently during different phases of their cycle if they're not getting enough sleep. But irregular menstrual cycles can be indicative of other causes, such as low energy availability or other concerns. And then if multiple periods, I'd say 2 to 3 are missed, it's important to bring this up to through a healthcare provider. And I want to reemphasize that periods are powerful and should be embraced. So next, I just wanted to talk about different causes for irregular absent periods. Relative energy deficiency in sport and the female athlete triad are 2 that we'll talk about. I think it's important to realize that it may not manifest or show up as a change in body weight. So there may not be a fall in body weight. I'd be curious, Dr. Edison, as far as your experiences and how athletes present, if you often see, sometimes you can see a fall in the growth chart, but maybe some other presenting symptoms that the athletes may have in addition to an absent period.
Oh yeah. So really falling off on your growth curve is one of the kind of extreme results that happen when you don't get the energy that you need, and it starts to affect your hormones and your performance. But other things that can come about would be feeling really tired or fatigued, problems with concentrating, like in school, if all of a sudden they're having a lot of trouble, particularly during kind of the early morning classes. They say that they've slept, they're sleeping the regular amounts, but they're really having trouble concentrating. If they get recurring injuries, so that's another thing that your energy availability and what you're taking in is related to your hormonal health, which is related to your period regulation, which is also regulated, connected to your bone health and your muscle and ligament health. So if you see, an athlete that's just repetitively getting injured time and time again, they might not have all the energy to fully repair. They might get to about 70%, but then they're going 100% of performance and then they get re-injured again. So all of those things, if they see their performance kind of starting to dwindle, all those things would be kind of warning signs to really open up those conversations. Hey, what's happening? How are you fueling yourself? Are there any issues that we need to kind of hone in on so we can address them earlier rather than later?
Yeah, perfect. Yes, completely agree. And you can see as part of our workup, we ask all these other questions and explore these other causes, but we are asking those questions as far as the nutritional aspects. And just to get us on the same page as far as what is low energy availability, so problematic low energy availability is defined as when athletes aren't taking enough energy or food or fuel to account for the exercise, as well as the body's natural processes such as metabolism, growth, and development. I think this is a really important concept because especially as these athletes are going through these important transitions, their bodies are growing, they're going to need more fuel in general. And then it's also usually the time when the intensity of their sport is increasing, the demands and the pressures are increasing. They may be feeling this pressure to stay in a certain body that has been performing well, maybe pre-puberty. So I think making sure that that athlete understands that those fueling needs are going to continue to increase throughout those transitions and through those years. And so as Dr. Edison had mentioned earlier, that the routes to low energy availability aren't just from an eating disorder. Sometimes we do see those and we try and catch those earlier on in their presentation. But oftentimes they're underfueling, they're unintentionally underfueling, they're overtraining, they're trying to get that extra edge through maybe another practice or another strength session, and or they're doing a combination of both. So it may not reach that full eating disorder diagnosis, but it can still be very problematic to important hormones throughout the body. And so the diagnosis or the definition that we often use is the female athlete triad, which is comprised of low energy availability, which leads to certain levels of hormonal suppression causing menstrual irregularity. There may just be occasional missed periods. There can even be more subtle changes with the hormones where an athlete still has a period, which I'll kind of get into a little bit later if we have time. And over time, this can lead to changes to overall bone turnover, bone remodeling, bone formation, bone breakdown, that gets altered and puts that athletes at greater risk of bone stress injuries. But I would also say that I see athletes who have issues with recovering from other types of overuse injuries, tendinopathies or tendinitis type issues that just are taking longer than I would expect. And I think that that is related to this low energy availability state. So really quickly, just to expand on this, because you probably also heard of relative energy deficiency in sport, which encompasses both health and performance consequences of the female athlete triad. And I know this is a hard figure to read, it's a little fuzzy, but I think it's these performance effects can sometimes present earlier than just a missed period. And I think sometimes athletes maybe will latch on to that a little bit more than maybe just talking about hormones and bone health and other things that we're passionate about. And I wanted to just close before handing things over to Julie and allowing for enough time for Q&A too. Some misconceptions, I'd already kind of touched on this, but where we talk about most athletes losing their period and it being almost a rite of passage to lose period, so it must be normal. I think it's really important, we as clinicians and as coaches, we talk about this at the beginning of the season, that preseason, that regular periods is an important part. It's like your dashboard. You want that period regularity, and that's just a sign that your body's functioning, your hormones are pumping in the right levels to make sure that there's reduced injury risk and optimal performance. Sometimes athletes get placed on birth control pill for a missed period. And I think that there's more to the story than this. Sometimes there is the right indication for menstrual irregularity or a missed period and being put on hormonal contraception for that. For example, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Sometimes athletes are placed on hormonal contraception for that reason. However, if an athlete's missed a period from low energy availability, they should not be placed on hormonal contraception, and that could be potentially harmful, especially certain types of hormonal contraception, which could be have negative effects on bone health. And lastly, being placed on hormonal contraception like the pill for a bone stress injury or to help bone healing is not an effective answer and can actually mask the period and make it more confusing for an individual to understand if they're having period regularity. We sometimes do prescribe certain types of transdermal estrogen for more significant or severe cases, but I'm not even going to get into that because it shouldn't be really first line treatment for majority of these athletes. So I flew through that to allow for Julie and Gavin to have enough time to chat and also to help kind of start to address some of that Q&A, but we'll come back to this, and I hope you're kind of taking notes as far as some of these areas that you want to learn more about. But I'm going to hand over the baton to Julie and talk about some of these coaching considerations.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Bianca. Yeah, I'm going to shift our attention a little bit to the more, you can go to the next slide whenever you're ready, Emily. To shift our attention to the more relational aspects of coaching and talk about, as this quote says, how that is also sort of vital and really foundational to supporting holistic well-being and overall health in female athletes and in all athletes. Because, we can go back, sorry, we'll get our timing down. I just want to say that the foundational information that that Emily and Bianca gave, I think is absolutely vital to coaching female athletes. And as they mentioned, there's not enough research and information out there. And in order to translate this information into supportive and caring ways of mentoring and leading our female athletes, we also have to focus on the relational part and foundational coaching strategies that allow us to engage in conversations about these important topics. So we can't place this knowledge and understanding of these important topics on top of a house of cards. We have to place it on top of like a really good understanding of what positive supportive coaching looks like overall. So there are a lot of different ways to talk about that and those concepts. And this is a PCA webinar. So I trust that most people out there have some basic understandings of positive coaching. So I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of culture. So you can go to the next slide. So, previous one. There we go. Culture is a word that gets thrown around a lot. What is team culture? Everybody talks about how it's important to have a positive and strong team culture. And the way I think about it are, with this, through these elements and this definition, observable and repeatable patterns of behavior, the way people make sense of their roles on teams and what they're supposed to be doing on a team in practice and competition and relationship with other people. And really the thing it boils down to is how we do things here, right? This is what a culture is, the way that we know that we show up and do things on this team. So you can go to the next slide. We often think of culture as built on kind of these grand gestures, right? On things like the halftime speeches or the team dinners or the signs in the locker room over the doorway that say believe or whatever it is that they're going to say. And those are really important. And those are the things that you would see in this diagram above the waterline, we'll say, right? They're the artifacts that show up that we can hear and touch and feel. But the most important part of culture is really built in those small moments, as Doug Lemov says, when we don't realize that we're building it, right? In the language we use, in the choices we make, in kind of the day-to-day moments and interactions we have with our athletes. That's really where the most powerful messages are. And so we want to think about how can we use those moments, those tiny moments, to build the kind of culture that we want. And so the acronym that we use at the Center for Leadership in Athletics, you can go to the next slide, is a caring culture. And that is built off of our ambitious coaching core practices, which I won't be able to go into all of them, but we take 6 of those practices to think about how we make a caring culture. And I'm going to just spend a very little bit amount of time on the first 3: communication, autonomy, support, and routines, as like specifically vital to building the kind of culture we want to support our female athletes. So starting with communication, The PCA model, I think here works great. How do we positively frame our communications with athletes? And by focusing on that elm tree of mastery that PCA uses, effort, learning, and mistakes, right? We're off to the start that we need to help athletes understand that this is a journey, to understand that we're seeking progress and not perfection, right? When you think about it, as Bianca talked about, athletes going through puberty, there's so many changes going on. Their limbs are growing, their bodies are changing. Like, they need to understand that their development is not linear, and our language and our ability to say, like, you just need to keep putting in the work. It's not always a straight path. I love that, to see that you're learning and growing and changing and trusting the process of both their bodies and their performance to come out on the other side. I think this way of framing our communication, especially during puberty, is really important. In terms of autonomy, yep, back. This is really, I'm really excited about sort of sharing some of the understandings that we're coming to as researchers about autonomy support. First, I want to just say what it is. So autonomy supportive coaching is the opposite of authoritarianism. It's the opposite of my way or the highway, right? So it's about providing choice. It's about acknowledging people's feelings, about giving people opportunities to solve their own problems, right? And what we're learning through research is that autonomy support seems to be a precursor to safety in sports. So there's been some research on concussion, and when coaches are willing to intervene in concussion when someone's injured, that it's coaches who are approaching coaching from an autonomy supportive vantage point that are most likely to take the right steps when it comes to concussion. And we also, some research that I've done recently shows that autonomy supportive coaching, actually people who value that also value safety more than coaches who don't value autonomy support, right? And I think that's because the sort of typical narrative, the heroic narrative of sport is like, push through the pain, keep going no matter what. And what we really need to do is open up a conversation and dialogue with our athletes about how their body feels, let them be in tune with and in touch with their bodies to make their own decisions. And that's what autonomy support is. And that's a safer, healthier way to approach coaching. I'm going to give just a really quick story about Gavin, who is my son's track coach and was my other son's cross country coach. So I don't have girls, but I think he is very autonomy supportive, whether he sort of knows it or not. But my son that he was coaching this year, he played basketball. He was also playing golf at the same time as running track. That's a whole story in itself. But Gavin could have been authoritarian about when he needed him to show up. And he could have said, you have to be there on these days. You have to do these workouts. Like, if you don't, like, you won't be able to run, right? And very likely my son would have not run. But Gavin gave him a tremendous amount of autonomy to said, here are the constraints and parameters, like the things I need you to meet. And if you can manage that within the rest of your schedule, I would love to have you here. And that autonomy kept the stress off of him and allowed him to show up in the ways that he could and to perform at his best, make it through a whole season and contribute to a state championship for the team. So it was a pretty great example of autonomy support. Okay, last one I'll talk about is just routines. And we all think of routines often as like those team meetings, the huddles before and after the game, the captain-led warm-up, right? The sort of physical, tangible routines. But I just want to mention language routines. I think that's a really important way of raising some of those things that are below the waterline in that culture picture I showed, to raising them above the waterline, right? How do we talk about who we are on this team, right? And how we can say things like, we strive for excellence, not perfection. On this team, we take rest days when we need them, right? So as a coach, using language that reflects really our values and care for our athletes' bodies is extremely important. Keegan Cook, who is the volleyball coach at the University of Washington, he uses that language all the time. Very successful coach. He used to say, we do things the Washington way. We communicate the Washington way, and communicating the Washington way was early. In volleyball, you communicate early so people can move and be in place. and in position. And in life, you communicate early so that when you need help, you ask for it before things get bad. So it's a really good example of a definition of the way we do things here. Last slide. So just going back to this diagram, I just want to mention that the really important part in coaching girls of bringing things above the waterline and kind of talking about what's important to you is that a lot of times we might do grand gestures or say things like, for example, mental health is important to us on this team. And we might have a speaker come at the beginning of the season, but we might not ever mention it the rest of the season. And a culture around mental health is developing under the waterline, right? It's there whether we're addressing it or not, right? And so we want to do everything we can to keep talking about it and keep raising it. The culture that girls and women are steeped in are ones that sends very particular messages about what an athlete looks like, about who an athlete is, about what our bodies should look like, about, you know, who can be a leader, who can be an athlete, all of these things. And as coaches, that's the hard work, is like knowing that those conversations are happening and it's the culture that girls are steeped in. And we need to do the work to be in relationship with them to bring that all above the waterline and build a healthy culture around it. So I will, from there, hand it off to Gavin.
Well, thanks, Julie. You know, speaking about the team culture there on that last slide, I can't count the number of times I have said almost the exact quote of every single one of those quotes that you had listed there. We really go into, you know, when we're building team culture, of building open and honest culture on the team, regardless of who it is. Because when the kids feel comfortable, you know, in this open and honest environment, they're more willing to come to you as a coach and tell you when things may not be feeling so great, if something feels off. You know, when, you know, in previous experience, you know, I've been on, you know, assistant coaches on those teams where it's, you know, we win at all costs and you push through the pain and you end up with a bunch of young men and young women in walking boots by the end of the season, or, you know, it's not a good situation. So really developing that culture, open, honest, you know, come talk to me if something doesn't feel right. We need to know now, like going back to the Washington way is early. I might rip that off and start, this is the Seattle Academy way, early and often, because the earlier you can get ahead, you know, or, you know, the earlier you can talk about anything that's going on, the easier it's going to be to address it rather than waiting until the end when there's a stress fracture, or, you know, God forbid there's an eating disorder, you know, whatever that looks like. So, you know, one of my key, you know, concepts with the team is that, and they all love it, but they don't really understand why I do it, is my attendance policy. And I know this sounds really like contrite, but my attendance policy is, you don't need to tell me why you're missing a day. You just need to tell me that you're not going to be there so that I can account for you not being there. But, you know, if you need a day off for whatever, and we go through, and when I have this conversation with the kids, everybody's eyes get big, like what, really? We don't have to. It's like, because if you just need a day off for whatever reason, maybe the schoolwork's piling up, maybe you don't feel well, maybe you have an appointment, you know, for me, I don't feel like the kids need to be able to, or should feel like they have to justify that to me. Sometimes you just need a day, and for whatever reason that is, you know. And, you know, I've found over the years that it has been so successful in one, it's almost a reverse psychology trick, because then the kids, they self-identify why they're missing practice, even though I've told them repeatedly that they don't have to, but they'll tell me why, or they'll come up and talk to me and say, you know, I've just, you know, over the last few weeks, I'm training and my energy is going down. And then I can go down the road of, well, let's talk about diet. Let's talk about, you know, what's going on at home, what's going on at school, and we can start peeling back the layers there. But it goes back to creating that culture, and it has to start, you know, from day one. I believe, you know, Emily mentioned this earlier, is it's a day one conversation that you have. It's a preseason conversation that you have, that we are an open and honest team here. And I'm not just saying that. It's you come to me with how you're feeling. You come to any of the coaches on the staff. We're all here to help you. And pushing through pain, pushing through fatigue, this isn't that place. One thing that I always stress with all the kids, but speaking with the girls as well, is as an athlete, you make your progress when you're resting, not when you're stressing yourself. You're stressing yourself to then push your body to a new point of physical exertion. But then when you're resting, that's when your body gets used to that level of physical exertion. So that then when we push again, that's the new baseline, we can go further. But we take more rest days on my team than we have workout days. We'll push, then we rest, then we rest again, then we push, then we rest. So it's really important when building that to explain to them why we're doing it. And going back to that open and honest, if something starts to feel south, how your body feels. I don't. So if you can articulate how it feels, then we just keep pushing forward. So it's been super great. It's worked for me for a very long time, and it helped. I know on the slide it said I'd won 2 state championships as a coach. 2 weeks ago, I added number 3. So and Julie's son was a very big part of that. But it's worked well, and it's really been a key cornerstone of the programs that I coach.
Well, congratulations, Gavin. I'll make sure and update that in the bio for the future. So I wanted to, this has all been great. I wanted to give an opportunity to answer some questions. There were some pre-talk questions that I wanted to start with, and then we can go through some of the Q&A set of questions that have come in through the Q&A. I want to open that up also for anyone else. One question that came up that I think is good for this group is, as a coach, how do you talk nutrition positively without giving girls negative thoughts around that concept? And I think in the past we hear, especially in my clinic, that this athlete eats really clean, or they're trying to hit race weight. And I think that there's something really important about learning how to have those conversations and not demonize certain foods. So I'm curious, as far as from the coach's perspective, and then I did get some from a dietitian, but also from a clinician's perspective, Dr. Edison.
Okay. Well, how I address it with my team is, I really try to dispel the myth early that skinny equals fast. And I go into them like, skinny doesn't equal fast, strong equals fast. And the way that you get fast is you have to fuel your body. And I actually spend quite a bit of time going into, the diet industry, telling everybody that carbs are the devil. And it's like, they're not. Carbs as an athlete, they're your best friend. That's how you get the fuel to become stronger. And I don't necessarily go into the nuts and bolts of this is what you should eat in this much quantity, because I'm not a dietitian. But it's really dispelling the myth that, okay, you are on the lettuce and ice cube diet while you're going through the season. Like, find the breads, find the noodles, find the rice, and especially with girls, I have found, there's this, the body consciousness and body image of, oh my God, if I eat this piece of pizza, oh my God, what's going to happen? It's like, and so I take the time to explain that, as an athlete, you are going to burn that piece of pizza off before practice is over. So have 2 pieces you need to really, really, really hammer the fuel. And I make sure and tell them, and I've got my assistant coaches who are women back there, reinforcing it as well, that you should be eating more than your friends who are just stationary, who are, at home playing the video games, not doing really anything. That you should be eating far and above more, because again, as an athlete, that's how you build your strength. When you're resting, this food that you're consuming, all of this, you think it's surplus, you're probably still not eating enough, even if you're gorging yourself. So, and when you're resting, going back to what I was saying earlier about, that's when we make our progress. Your body needs that fuel to help you rest, to help the body recover. So it's worked very well for my programs over the years that, I had she's a senior, she just graduated last night, come up, we were at a track meet, and she was, getting ready to go, and she had like 4 different sets of bagels with different toppings, just like spread out. She's like, okay, this is what I'm gonna have before the meet, this is what I have in the middle of the meet, this is what I'm gonna have to recover. And she's offering it up to people, and she's like, no, I need to eat because I am an endurance athlete. And just when she said that, I was like, oh, they listen. Oh my God. So it was really, really a fun thing for me to see.
Yeah, Gavin, I really like your approach to fueling, not really talking about being thin or whatnot, but really about the strength and being able to perform, and that our food provides that fuel to be able to do that. And a lot of times I'll equate it, kind of use 2 metaphors. I'll say, if you want to take a road trip, and I ask my athletes, think about the greatest car that you want to take a road trip in, and go from LA to Santa Barbara and be a great road trip. Would you expect to go there with an eighth of a tank of gas? And they say no. I'm like, well, why are you treating your body worse than, a car you would ride in? And then in terms of the variety of foods, there are different categories of foods that all have their important, important service for our body. And say, if you're gonna, we can't build a house with just a hammer and some nails. We need the wood, we need the scaffolding, we need the drywall, we need all of that, because if not, then it's going to fall apart. And just like our bodies, and if we don't give our bodies what we need, then our bodies inherently, all of our bodies want to survive no matter what. And if they don't, get what they need, then they start breaking, we start breaking our own selves down to get what we need. And the first kind of aspects of that are our bones and our muscles. And that, so instead of our bodies focusing on getting better and stronger during that recovery mode, it's going into that survival mode. And then our performance goes down a lot.
Bianca, that's great. Thank you. And I think one thing that I'll just add is from this dietitian, she has this all foods fit mentality, and really reminding these athletes that they need, and they like go for the donut, go for that pizza, and understanding that there aren't any foods that are off limits or should be shamed. So I think that in creating that culture within the team is a great start. Or that athlete, that role model, that graduate who has the bagel spread. It's great. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and look at this conversation of menstrual cycle and periods, and when is a good time to start talking about it. I'm bringing this up partly, I think it's a great question, and I think it's a little dependent on kind of the athlete and where they are in the maturity. And the question by Carolyn was around, should this conversation be started with 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds? And I think probably going back to that slide as far as when do we get concerned age 15 if no cycle by age 15 in an athlete? Clearly we need to be starting that conversation sooner than that. And I think that Bianca, I'll probably flip this to you too, just for your thoughts. I start to get athletes maybe around 10, 11, or 12, where they start to potentially, based on sport, based on how competitive they are in their sport, they may start to have certain training habits where they are unintentionally or at a low energy availability state. They may not know it. They may just be training at that higher level. So I think maybe not the conversation about periods, but just healthy body, healthy fueling habits, and not like clean fueling habits, but really just making sure that they're getting enough in their body for their amount of training.
Oh yeah, I think that the nuances can fluctuate or change based on the age, maturity level, development level. But I think planting those seeds and really normalizing these conversations are really important early on. and children, females can start getting their period as young as 8. And so, but it's really important, if you're a coach, that particular athlete is not ostracized or made to feel bad because they have their period, and I think at that age, it's important to talk about this as part of our body's normal kind of progress. And it's great, and it's there for a reason. I loved Lydia Ko, who is a high level professional golfer. She's like number 3 in the world, and she had to step off to get worked on. And one of the reporters ran up and said, "Well, what's wrong? Are you injured?" She's like, "No, I'm on my cycle. Just plain and simple. That's it. Period. I got my period. We're not here to make a huge deal about it, and you're not going to shame me as a female athlete, but that's, and I have to take care of my body." So I think if we talk about that and exactly as you said, Emily, just really honoring our bodies and making sure that we're putting the right things in to support us as we grow and develop. I think that's important. And then as you get older, to really screen for those things if things are starting to drop off.
Awesome. Thanks, Bianca.
I
Oh, go ahead.
know you have another question, but I just want to add one thing to that, which is that I feel like if you're a coach that's coaching 10 to 14-year-olds, that a lot of times I think coaches feel like they aren't the experts to talk to parents. But I always encourage coaches to think about themselves as experts, and that parents are the partners in this. And this is a really important conversation for coaches to raise with parents, because the challenges of going through puberty as a girl competing in sports are real, and they're going to show up every single day. And so in that coaches meeting, in that parent meeting that you would have if you're coaching girls of that age, I think it's we want to normalize it. We want to bring it above the surface. Like, over the next few years, girls are going to be going through puberty. Here's what we know about puberty. Here's how you can support them at home. The path is no longer going to be linear. They might regress a little bit. That's okay. We're sticking with them. Here's how we support that. Like, delivering those messages to the girls and parents, I think can be really, really powerful here. And that is one of the places that coaches, I think, don't feel comfortable enough having that conversation, and webinars like this hopefully can put more knowledge in folks' hands to be able to have those really important conversations.
Yeah, great point, Julie. And I think it's a nice segue into the next question around keeping girls in sport. Melissa asked a great question about thoughts around supporting girls in sports that are overwhelmingly male dominated, such as freestyle skiing or mountain biking. It's tough in these sports to break in and progress as a girl, and there's a stigma around talking about female specific performance needs. Gavin, Julie, you want to take the mic?
Yeah, do you want to go first, Gavin?
Sure. With running, I don't know that it's necessarily more male dominated than anything, but I think, bringing girls into anything, cross country, track and field related, in track, there's at least, there's 18 different events in track. So you kind of get to pick and choose what you'd like to do there. But getting them in and keeping them engaged, I have found it's really centered on the individual, not necessarily by a group, just finding ways to keep people engaged once they join is, trying to find that one thing or, one or two things that they can really latch on to, that where they stay engaged. I've had more than my fair share of people come out for cross country in the fall thinking, okay, well, this is just running. This is going to be easy. And I tell everybody on day one, I'm like, if it was just running, I would be out of a job. I would not need to, I don't need to teach you how to run. If a bear jumped over that fence over there, you're not going to stop and go, how do I get away? You're going to run. So it's how to, you know, keep that engagement through setting small goals with one, you know, with everybody. You know, some people have got this need to want to win a state championship. Some people just want to finish the race without walking. So it's, you know, and then you build, you know, little bits here and there. So I don't know how that would necessarily translate to something like mountain biking or figure skating, things of that nature. But, you know, really keeping them engaged once they're out is just finding that thing that you can hook on to and then progress forward with, be that winning a championship, be it, you know, maybe, and I know nothing about skating, but I know the term triple lutz. So maybe you want to hit that triple lutz and then you want to hit two of them, you know, whatever that is, just kind of keep going with that and keep finding that next step to build on to then, you know, that way they continually have something to work for.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Gavin in that, you know, having goals for each individual and targeting, you know, what each person is trying to get out of sport is an important way of keeping anybody in sport. In terms of, you know, co-ed spaces or more masculinized spaces, I think it is important to note that sports in general is a masculinized space, right? Like historically, that's what we're contending with, and still, and only right now, about 25% of youth sport coaches are women. And so there are a lot of spaces where girls and women are showing up and they don't feel like it reflects them. And I guess, you know, not to always deliver the same message, but like, we need to speak it out loud. You know, if a girl shows up and there's only boys competing, we should definitely not ignore that. And we should talk to them about, acknowledge their feelings about it, talk to them about it, you know, and encourage them to, you know, process what it means for them to be there in that more male dominated spaces, those male dominated spaces. We also need to talk to men and boys about that fact, right? I mean, I know we don't have a ton of time, but a real quick story. I ran a cohort of 10 organizations through a shared learning process around gender equity. And one in a mountain biking organization was trying to bring more girls into their programming. And so they were offering a girls' affinity ride at the meets. And what happened was the coaches said, well, I don't want them to do that affinity pre-ride because then maybe they like won't be as competitive. Like, I need to give them my tips. I don't want them to just join with other girls and not get the right tips so that they won't be competitive. So as coaches, we also have to, again, think about what are our values. Are our values to like let girls be in affinity spaces to grow the sport and to keep them connected to other people in the sport who are going to keep them there, or is it to win the race? And sometimes those things are going to be at odds, and we need to talk about them and, you know, figure out how we can collectively focus on the participation part over the performance part, because that's likely what's going to grow people's engagement and keep them in the sport for longer.
Well, this is a nice transition to our last question. I can't believe this hour is already wrapping up, but I wanted to just throw a question out to the team, the panel. There is a disproportionately higher number of male coaches than female coaches. And as much as I would say we need more female coaches, I think that there's more to be said about that. And how can we better educate our male coaches and support them? So I just want to put a broad question out to the group as far as what male coaches should know or need to know in order to coach female athletes. And I realize that's a big question, and so we can't get into it, but maybe one or two tips from each of you to wrap things up.
As in any of our spaces of identity, just knowing that you don't have to exactly share someone else's identity or have the same in order to support them, mentor them, and sponsor them. And so I think that's very important for sports. Sports bring so much positivity from a physiologic, and emotional, developmental, a mental health perspective. And so I think it's really important that we focus on, the equity of sports, not equality of sports, because right now there is such disproportionate access and resources for female athletes, that we really need to lean in to make sure that they aren't excluded, and they don't drop off. There's a critical time when things start to drop off for our female athletes, and so I would say to focus on that to best support them.
I think I would say that I think it was Lauren Fleshman who said, like, if we coached everyone like we think we're supposed to coach girls, like actually that's good coaching for everybody. Right? That if sometimes we think it needs to be more relational. Yes, for everybody, right? It's really not about boys and girls. It's about having like those positive coaching strategies for everybody that allows everyone to acknowledge. My dogs are barking. I'm here. Like acknowledge their feelings and be whole people and bring them their whole selves to being an athlete, and everyone's performance and everybody's overall well-being will benefit from that kind of expansive view of coaching.
I would say the two points to hit for me would be one, to from day one foster that like community aspect of open and honest communication on the team. And then the second thing would be, it's one of my favorite sayings, it is ask, don't assume. So, make sure that you see something. It's like the airport rule, see something, say something. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, because as a male coach, I will never, ever know what it's like to run during a menstrual cycle. So being and fostering that community on the team of being able to ask questions regarding that is super, super important, because a lot of times these girls won't know, they'll think, okay, well, I just can't talk about this. And you need to be able to foster that sense of, yes, you can, and it's totally normal. And you feel free to come to me, come to any of the coaches, but we're here to help.
Oh, that's great.
And if I could just add, it's we need to be aware of our biases, and just understand we all have them, but they can be addressed. Our brains are malleable, as long as they're aware of them. And the other thing is, it's okay to say, I don't know, as a coach, but it's not okay to end there. It's okay to say, I don't know, but I will do my best to find that information or resources to help you. I think if we just lean in a little bit more and just talk more as a community, I think that our athletes will be better supported and served.
Yeah. I feel like you all just took a little bit of what I would have said. But Gavin, I think I connected and resonated. I really connected with what you were saying with regards to having those difficult conversations. Even if they're awkward or you kind of stumble through them, it's a start. And I think that words do matter with these athletes, and comments about looking fit, they hit, and those athletes remember those, and they'll even bring those comments to the clinic. And I think the dismissive offhand comments can really impact an athlete, and talk about retention and keeping athletes in sport. We need to be thinking about our words and how those words can really impact and influence an athlete. So I wish that we had more time to dive into this, but I think that was what I expected and what I warned you all about. But I wanted to pass things back to Trish to close things out, and hopefully we can keep this conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you so much for lending your expertise and stories, and to everyone who joined today. Just as a reminder, we will be sending out a link and a recap to this webinar that was recorded. And my colleague Casey Uren has been putting some links in the chat for references. Again, thank you so much. If you're not following PCA, we're on social. I know Faster is on social as well. So please feel free to reach out for any further resources. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.